Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. Today you're listening to episode 166, and I'm calling it The 411 on Leaky Gut, Part 2. Now last week I talked about the food-related things that might create or aggravate our leaky gut. That is, after defining it for you all. So if you're curious about leaky gut in terms of the general situation, you might want to start with that episode first. This week, I'm going to talk about the role that stress may play in causing or aggravating our leaky gut. And hopefully, I'm implying that we may have some control over the stress and therefore the leakiness. But first, an update on the bone broth controversy. The paleo people have been promoting bone broth for years, without much of a ruckus from people like me. So I'm just going to be ruckusing around a bit here. I will give you the links to both sides of the argument so you can read them for yourself. And again, I'm not pushing it or telling you to avoid it. I'm just the messenger. A few weeks back, I did a podcast episode on a nutrition book called Eat Dirt by Dr. Josh Axe. That's A-X-E. I'll give you a link to that episode in the show notes. Dr. Axe is a chiropractor who touts bone broth and sells it on Amazon for $40 per container. I bet the Flintstones got a better deal on their bones, but that's in the past. So if this $40 tub of powdered bone broth is that expensive, it must work great, right? I think that was Tony the Tiger and not the Flintstones, but you get the picture. Whether or not this bone broth works may depend on whether or not you're okay with a little lead in your chicken noodle soup, but I'm guessing you're not. There are several studies that measured the lead content in different bones that can contribute to lead in our soup. And again, you're welcome to investigate further, and I'll give you links in the show notes. I was aware before that lead can accumulate in bones, and vaguely aware that lead could leach into the water when the bones were boiled. But is this a problem? Or is it more like the Appleseed controversy? I confess that I made the mistaken assumption that if the chickens were organic, then there would be no lead at all. And this is the controversy right here. And I'm not sure that this controversy has been solved as of this date. When they always say at the end of these articles, quote, "New studies are needed," close quote, this might be a situation where that is certainly the case. And that's because people are drinking bone broth quite a bit and getting it on Amazon from Dr. Axe. And there's quite a few people doing this because, once again, he's getting more hits on his website than Dr. Oz. I looked around and found a National Institute of Health article that just came out in 2017. This is basically saying that you should be okay if you go with organic chickens and make your own broth. There was a tiny bit of lead in the broth, but not enough to cause much of a stir. And speaking of stir, in a few articles, they say that you can accumulate lead in your own bones and eventually have it leak into your central nervous system. That's especially true if you have a gun and practice shooting at a firing range. Remember, the bullets have lead, and the lead can leak onto your hands. So there are risks to firing guns, both inside and outside of schools. Just FYI to the parents of those school-age children. If you have a gun and like to fire it at a firing range, beware. Let's get back to the bone broth. There is also another article from nutritionfacts.org. Now, the author of this website article maintains the following. He says there are 2 articles that suggest that lead can leak into the chickens, even on organic farms, especially if they're urban farms. That might be because of lead paint or other sources of lead, such as car batteries. So even bone broth from organic chickens contains a tiny bit of lead. And just as a disclaimer, I personally am in the Mediterranean diet camp versus the paleo camp. I just suggest if you buy bone broth on the web. Take a look at those articles if you're curious. I know that is a lot to swallow, and I'm not quite sure what to think, but I'll keep looking and seeing if I can find more articles on the subject. Again, I'll give you a couple of links in the show notes. Just another side note, and again, FYI, you can do whatever you like. Calcium supplements made from bones did also have a trace amount of lead. Okay, back to the episode. The effects of stress on our leaky gut. And I apologize if that last update stressed you out a bit. Now, speaking of the NIH, there is another good NIH article on stress and leaky gut, and I'll give you the link to that in the show notes as well. Last week I mentioned that once we have a leaky gut, substances like glyphosate from Roundup or, say, pathogenic organisms might get into our bloodstream and then to our brain. Neurological symptoms of a leaky gut can include depression, anxiety, insomnia, or maybe even bipolar disease. But can psychological stress cause a leaky gut? Well, let's start out with what we know. We know that both acute and chronic stress can trigger a fight or flight response in our body. In both acute and chronic stress, cortisol can get released. Cortisol is a hormone that triggers a bunch of things, including a rise in blood sugar. So stress has a direct effect on our digestion by taking the action or blood flow away from your stomach. The blood flow then concentrates in your muscles and your brain, where it is needed to either fight with a bear or take flight from the bear. But in the year 2018, the stress is completely different, as we know. In either case, the digestion of your food will have to take a back seat. A disruption in your digestion can alter the best possible scenarios for the breakdown and absorption of your food. As I just mentioned, cortisol is triggered when you're under stress, and the cortisol then increases your blood sugar. All this upheaval may give you some gastrointestinal inflammation, which, as we mentioned last week, can make your leaky gut worse. Intense stress, such as a car accident, can actually make you a little nauseous. Here's another factor. Psychological stress or trauma can affect our immune system. And this might be familiar, as anyone knows who has caught a cold when they're under stress. Stress can also change a regular eating pattern, which again should seem obvious to anyone living on this planet. If we change our food intake, we may change our gut microbiota or microbiome. So in other words, this might alter both the beneficial bacterial barrier in our intestines and our immune system barrier. Another factor is this. As I mentioned in my previous episode, alcohol also appears to be a factor in this whole leaky gut situation. And again, this will seem obvious. What do some of us do when we're under a lot of stress? We say, "Boy, do I need a drink," or "Boy, do I need a drink." When I was doing diet instructions, actually since the 80s, for any type of illness that would include the GI tract, I would say, alcohol is a gastrointestinal irritant. In other words, it irritates the lining of the GI tract, which, as we now know, because we've learned a lot, can create or make worse the leaky gut. You probably remember when you were watching scenes from, say, Gone with the Wind, when they just poured whiskey over an open wound. In that and many other ways, modern medicine actually has been good to us. Alcohol kills the bacteria, but at a price. Here's another interesting tidbit about stress and leaky gut. You might remember an organism called H. pylori when it comes to stomach distress. This specific bacteria can increase under acute stress. So the presence of H. pylori can aggravate the opening or even create a new opening in the gut. It has been shown to do this by killing off an important protein that protects our gut from leakiness. Also, infections from nasty bacteria like H. pylori and others, such as E. coli, can trigger an abnormal immune response. And again, that can make our leaky gut worse. What can we do about all this? Well, the first thing we can do is give ourselves probiotics to help our leaky gut and then keep it healthy once it is healed. Although there are many probiotics, especially those in your favorite yogurt with active cultures that can help, there is one that has gotten the attention of many researchers. There's a probiotic called Bacteroides fragilis, and this is now being recommended by many scientists to help this leaky gut. There was also a study looking at this particular probiotic with regard to autism spectrum disorder, and I found that very interesting. There needs to be more studies, and I know I'm sounding like the people in the NIH articles, but if there are more articles like that that can prove autism is improved with probiotics, then we have some idea how to treat it, and even perhaps what's causing it. Just as a side note, they know that people who suffer burns are clearly under an intense amount of stress that we might call psychological stress. In that case, there's both types of stress. Our bodies are stressed out by the burn, and having a burn with a lot of pain causes psychological stress. Let's face it, it's pretty scary to be burned. They've proven that there are changes in the bacterial population in our gut when patients suffer these burn injuries. There's a lot less of the good bacteria in our gut, and then some bad characters like E. coli can slip in. And then what results is leaky gut. Okay, so we talked about probiotics, and I might do a future episode helping you out with specific probiotics that seem to work. But let's get to the stress reduction. So if stress is a problem, the recommended treatment would, of course, be a stress reduction technique, right? Well, in this case, yes, right. It has been proven to work. The specific stress reduction technique basically should be the one that you're comfortable doing, and maybe doing on a daily basis. My particular technique of choice is TM, or Transcendental Meditation, but mindfulness meditation or yoga or any similar technique are popular now and, in fact, work. If you want to combine activities to reduce stress, even better, they say. For example, you could do a daily walk coupled with meditation. Or you could do yoga and listening to relaxing music. Basically, whatever floats your boat and does the trick for you. If you like it, you can do it on a daily basis, and it's not that painful to put into your daily routine. Now, how do you know if stress is affecting you in a negative way? And how do you know when it's working? I like to think of it like this. We all have, inevitably, times that are difficult. The Buddhists like to begin in the Four Noble Truths by saying, in life, there is suffering. But then they say stay tuned, basically, because they go on to tell you how to cope with it. And I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that meditation is part of their program. Let's say you're under a great deal of stress because, for example, you've just lost your job. It might help to be aware of how you're feeling. In other words, do you now have a short fuse? Are you stress eating a bag of potato chips? Then after trying these stress reduction techniques, think about how you're feeling after meditating. So you get the picture. I think more than ever right now, it can always help to focus on reducing stress in whatever way works for us. Your family, your friends, and your intestines will thank you. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.